what's it like? So let's talk
Yep.
about the emotional side of that first, and
Yep.
then kind of rewind that.
Yep. Yep.
Because I'm thinking more about how do we profile you.
When you say what's it like, it's more like in the corporate life.
No. What's the
In
transition? The
transition,
transition
like
from
okay,
transition
that I can
from
talk about.
corporate to
I can talk a lot
yeah. I
about
mean
that.
transition from corporate to it's
Absolutely.
got to be about founder story.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. That makes sense.
Okay, let us know when. There's a lot of tech, man.
Yeah, I can see that.
We are live. Fantastic. You guys go ahead. Callum?
Happy New Year, guys. Welcome to the Sydney Startup Show for 2021. Together with me today, we have Hitesh, the founder CEO of Enteliqo. Hitesh, tell us a little bit more about some of the amazing stuff you're doing.
Hi, Callum. Thanks for having me here, and happy New Year to all of you as well. At Enteliqo, we have a mission to transform human health by using advances in artificial intelligence, photonics, and precision medicine to improve the speed and accuracy in the diagnosis and treatment of specific life-threatening infections, chronic diseases, and cancers. The whole idea is to augment humanity's existence using precision medicine and to improve, for the greatest good of all.
Yeah, tell us more about the company that you founded. Tell
Yep.
us more about some of the really cool stuff you guys are doing.
Okay. So, I set up this company about 2 years ago, with some co-founders in the clinical space. We initially started off by looking at about 300 projects, working in collaboration with research institutions to understand what are they working on, and then we filtered these down using some of the criteria that I've used in my corporate experience, things like the extent of the unmet need and so on. We've now come down to about 5 really exciting projects that we think are going to make a good difference in those particular procedures, and they're also sizable in volume and so on. So so one of most of that research is happening in Australia. Uh, I'm also speaking to some in the US and one institution in the UK. So the whole idea is ultimately we have a pipeline of new projects that can consistently make an exciting difference. So different projects. One focusing on the breath, the other one's focusing on intractable pain. There's one focusing on diagnosis of brain cancers. There's one around the imaging of the narrowest arteries in your capillaries, which is relevant to cardiologists, and then some which are not really medical devices, but more on what I call medical data annotation or visual question answering based on advances in computer imaging. So yeah, it's really exciting.
Tell us more about, one of the portfolios that you're most excited about at the moment.
Okay. So the project's called Breathalyzer. What we do here is we analyze human breath to understand, changes at a molecular level to create disease detection platforms. So we can understand what happens at a molecular level in the normal state and in the disease state, and then help doctors arrive at a diagnosis much quicker. So we're starting off with the first one, which is the shortness of breath. The medical term is dyspnea. Um, dyspnea is like Disneyland, but so just think of it that way. And it's generally caused by an underlying heart or lung condition. What happens here in this disease is there's a high mortality rate, and the rapid diagnosis and early start of treatment is critical. So, in the conventional approaches, the patients would typically go through things like blood biomarker investigations, X-rays or CTPAs, which is a CAT scan for pulmonary embolism, um, and ultimately that process could take a few hours or even 1 or 2 days, depending on how quickly you get the result. What we are aiming to do is to create a device as small as a toaster or possibly an iPhone, something as small as that, where a patient could simply breathe into the device, similar to a breathalyzer that a cop uses, when it's analyzing alcohol, and arrive at a quick diagnosis in, say, under 3 seconds. So at this stage, we could could be doing it in 2.5 seconds, and so on. So you get speed and you get accuracy, and from a healthcare payer's perspective, because a lot of it can be done out of the hospital, it saves the government a lot of money. In the healthcare side, we focus both on the patients and the clinicians, but also on the payer side, because it's critical that we are able to prove some effectiveness, some efficiency gains. Sorry.
And what stage is the platform at? Because obviously this has gone through a
Yeah,
lot of research.
sure. So we are collaborating with a leading research institution in Adelaide, and we've been working on this for a while now, almost 2 years. Um, we would say that we've proven the science in the lab environment. In fact, we even have a prototype that's ready. Some research papers have been published in leading journals. There's a world-renowned team working on this project, not just comprising of clinicians, but also photonics engineers, biomedical engineers, and data scientists. And the next step is to finish. So the exciting part is we know that the science works, and we can achieve what we were out to achieve. The next step is to complete the product development, mainly compacting the product, and then take it to the clinical trial stage, where we are looking at 10 countries. So some in Europe, some in North America, mainly Canada and the US, and some in Asia. This is in addition to Australia and New Zealand. So the next step, so you finish those clinical trials, and then we get to regulatory submissions, and then the strategic exit. So that's the whole plan, and then get on to the next project. So the good thing about this one is that the same platform, same technology can be used to detect other diseases in the future as well. So as we are able to get some outcome with, say, dyspnea, the next thing we could be doing is diabetes or cancers, or many other. I mean, the sky's the limit, because there's so much you can do. Your human breath is a big source of information on the inner body.
Yeah. So I mean, if you think about Disney as an example of that, how many patients are generally affected either in Australia or anywhere else in the world? And how does this particular technology, or rather, how is this different to what's done at the moment in the market?
Okay. So, you know, the patients of dyspnea present themselves to emergency departments in hospitals, and to GPs. Sometimes they're also seen by the ambulance services. At this stage, the data we have from research shows that about 280 to 300 million patients they present with dyspnea to emergency departments in the developed world. So, that's a big number. The mortality rate is also very, very high. So, hence I was saying that the early detection, rapid start of treatment is critical. What what happens in the current practices is that when you present to a doctor, the key task for the emergency physician is to ascertain whether the underlying cause is a respiratory ailment or a cardiac ailment, and therefore they could then refer you to the appropriate cardiologist or the respiratory physician, because you need to get the right treatment quickly. So you could have, say, for example, with the heart, you could have atrial fibrillation, or congestive heart failure, and so on. Or in the lungs, you could have complex pneumonia, COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and so on. So, it's about getting to the root cause and treating it quickly. So that's the process. And what happens at that point is the patients go through multiple things, like it could be blood biomarker investigations, it could be X-rays, it could be CAT scans, and a series of other reports that is specific to each patient. So there's no one size fit all, and that process could take a fairly long time. A few hours, as said, to even up to a few days, depending on the availability of the labs, the results, the people who are analyzing the reports, and so on.
Right.
So that is vital time that's lost, and that's the gap that we're trying to plug. Is to say, if we can bring down that time dramatically, in our case we're talking 2.5 seconds, uh, then it could make a huge difference to the rapid treatment of these patients, improving patient outcomes, and then hopefully also saving the government some money.
Right. So if you think about the current processes and the current practices, and if a patient is presented to an emergency room, there is two things. One is to be able to recognize that
Yes.
somebody has shortness of breath. That's not
Yes.
hard. That's visual.
Yep.
Um, and that's a chief complaint
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
And there'll be other symptoms of cardiac symptoms, for example, that is probably more prevalent
Yep.
in many cases
Yes.
than perhaps a non-cardiac event.
Yes.
And I think the existing protocols will say, well, do an ECG,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
things like that,
Sure.
and there are other indicators anyway.
That's it.
Nonetheless. So how is this different? I mean, how like I agree that there is a lot of,
Sure.
it could take days, but
Sure.
some of these events, like cardiac events, for
Yes.
example, people don't wait for days. If
Yes.
anything, some
Yes.
of these
So
ECGs will be done even
sure.
in the ambulances.
Sure. Sure. So what's happening is while the doctor is determining the underlying cause of dyspnea, the patient is being given symptomatic relief, right, of some sort. So it's not that they are suffering along the way. In terms of how what our device does is it'll have an LCD display, which basically has two components. It could have a traffic light system, which basically tells that there's an ailment, and if it is, it's a cardiac or a thing. On the other hand, it could even show peaks and patterns, which makes it very easy for the doctor or the emergency physician in this case to come to the appropriate course of action very quickly. So that is different as opposed to waiting with all the other conventional approaches.
Right.
So they get the information on the LCD screen very quickly.
And what's the source of the science behind this method of diagnostic as opposed to perhaps the conventional wisdom today?
Okay. So, the fact that your human breath, the exhaled breath, can be a source of your inner health has been known for a long time. It's been a huge challenge scientifically to crack the reason behind it. I think we would be the first to get to that point if and we are progressing well in that direction. What we do is we use advances in photonics to create a real-time spectral signature of the molecule. So this is the exhaled molecules out of your breath, and because there's a lot of data, because when you breathe out, it could be having lots and lots of like gigabytes and terabytes of data that's being analyzed by advanced computational techniques that are used by some of the space agencies like NASA and the Australian Space Agency, and that's where the advanced techniques in AI come into place. Specifically deep machine learning using convolutional neural networks to make sense of all of that, and then we are able to arrive at a concentration on a parts per billion level, and then say, okay, what that leads to fast and accurate diagnosis. So, and we know what happens in the normal state versus the abnormal state. Therefore, we are able to give a clear understanding to the doctor.
So what you're saying is, I mean, there is obviously research that suggests that is possible.
Yes.
Why has this not been done before?
I think the advances in photonics that we have now, and also the skill sets that are required to get it happen, are not available in many countries. And I think we are lucky in Australia to have that available here. So, in Adelaide, we have the Australian Institute of Machine Learning. We have got a lot of expertise here in photonics and spectroscopy, and also the clinical expertise. So the combination of all of that is helping to, and plus the ability to use some of the cutting edge Nobel Prize winning technologies like the optical frequency comb, for example, that is making a huge ability to do that. So I think we are going to be the first to get to that level of analysis.
Right. And as an approach, though, I mean, what are the doctors saying? Like as an approach, because I mean, doctors need to be convinced that
Yes.
this approach as a whole,
Yeah.
as opposed to the current way it's being done
Yes.
today,
Yes.
that's going to be a massive change management,
Yes.
and that'll require actual doctors to,
Absolutely.
be comfortable with this new
Sure.
process. And
Sure.
and what are the doctors saying?
So, as part of the product development, we did customer validation with a large number of clinicians, mainly cardiologists, respiratory physicians, neonatal intensivists, and the emergency physicians. These are people who we feel could be the primary users of these products. And this is in addition to GPs and ambulance services. We've had the best possible response from all of them, mainly emergency physicians, cardiologists, and respiratory physicians. They just felt that the fact that we can cut down the time it takes to the diagnosis could be hugely beneficial, for the patients. Same thing in neonatal intensive care, where the patients could be very serious, and the ability to diagnose the root cause of dyspnea quicker could make a huge difference. So we've had very positive feedback. What we are also doing is all along the way, as we're doing research, and we analyze sterile samples of breath, say in the lab, we are also getting some of their feedback in the process. It's also a consistent modification of the product as we get more input. But if people are very excited about the fact that you can analyze, get the diagnosis of a disease accurately using human breath, and the fact that it can be out of the hospital, it just sounds simple and quite attractive. So our feedback has been very, very good. There's always been the few odd people who say let's use the product, and I think they'll be convinced as we do the clinical trials and so on.
So just for the audiences, like if you think about most revolution
Yes.
in disruption or revolution or new innovative products that
Yes.
has come out in healthcare,
Yep.
including the COVID vaccine.
Yes.
Pfizer was the first. So I think it's very easy for people to understand that usually these types of innovation comes from the Americas, usually,
Yes.
or a
Yes.
large chunk of that.
Yep.
Why Australia and how did this happen here?
Um, I feel that there's a good amount of research happening here. Very good research happening. I myself have been exposed to some cutting edge institutions in Sydney, in Adelaide, in Queensland, and in Melbourne. So these are the four places, and I think they're at a world class level. They are contributing to a lot of that research that's happening worldwide as well. Uh, I just feel that with the kind of support that they would get to help them commercialize the ideas, so that they too can get funding, for ongoing research. That's there, but not as good as it could be, and that's the gap I'm trying to fill in. So I think there are superb ideas. There are some really good people. It's also a collaboration across different sectors. So there could be somebody in Adelaide who's got an amazing idea. If they could work with somebody in Melbourne or Queensland, which is a great center for genomics, for example, then. But I think there's no dearth of skill sets in Australia. It's just about bringing it out there, and a lot more support, to take it all the way to commercialization. So, this is my first stint, so I'm very happy that I'm here. But I'm absolutely, in fact, I've stopped at 5 projects because of capacity constraints. I can't do more than that because I need funding and take it forward. But if I had my way, we could do as many as 10. And there are many, many more amazing ideas, especially in the congruence of technology and medicine. So whether you look at artificial intelligence and medicine, or artificial intelligence and other technologies using to solve a problem in medicine that is not being resolved by a medicine or a medical device or a pharmaceutical or a medical device, there's a lot of work happening in that space here. And I would say, while yes, the US is way ahead, and they've always been the center for excellence and so on, Australia is really catching up. And in fact, every institution I'm talking to in the US also about future collaboration, they're quite excited about what we're doing. And I'm using collaboration to get efficiencies in the research and trial and so on. But so those guys are also looking up to us with some respect. It's yeah, and I see more of that happening. I see more of that happening in the future. There's just so many ideas. And by the way, I'm focusing on adult medicine and so on. There's a lot happening in dentistry and physiotherapy and all the allied health sciences as well. And I think Australia may not lead the way, but they would certainly be there in the top 5, because it's just so much work and there's that expertise here, and the excitement, of course, with people wanting to make a big change. So, and as I said, I myself have seen that in 5 institutions here, and I'm blown away by the extent of work that's happening here.
So, just kind of thinking about one of the projects you mentioned
Yep.
with Disney in particular as an example.
Yes.
How did you end up picking that as an example to focus on, and why are you so passionate about that?
It's been a condition that's been around for, shortness of breath has been around for a long time, and the fact that we could provide a fast, accurate, and convenient diagnosis, but also in an affordable manner, that's what really attracted me. And the fact that there's something which seems so simple. It's very complex from the science perspective, but something that seems so simple from an execution perspective. That is, for the clinician to just analyze breath, and the fact that we could then take it to the next level of diagnosing other diseases is what attracted me to the concept. Is it was cutting edge. No one else was doing it, so we'd be the first in the world. The numbers look great from an investment perspective, and the fact that we would be solving a problem that's quite prevalent, and we'd be able to help the doctors arrive at a decision much faster. So it's about augmenting their ability to make that. That's what really excited me.
So usually these types of big projects like these, even just one of the projects you talked about, like a Disney
Yes.
project, any one of those projects, they're huge projects, and usually it's the larger incumbents that tend to
Yes.
get involved with these types of things. These things can take billions of dollars to execute
Yes.
from start to finish.
Yes.
Before you start getting the returns. And historically, these things can take even a decade, sometimes more.
Yep.
With the exception of what's happening with Pfizer and with the COVID vaccine, these
Yes.
things, as we all know, these
Yeah.
things take a very long time. So it
Yep.
requires stamina,
Yep.
right? If anything. So, I mean, I guess the question is, why aren't the incumbents doing this?
One of I don't have a clear-cut answer to that. But what I would say, having worked in some large corporations, sometimes the speed and nimbleness, due to the sheer fact of their size and the structure that they need to put in place, which translates sometimes to some bureaucratic processes, could be coming in the way. Whereas I think as a startup, you're a lot more nimble. Uh, More importantly, uh, to answer your question on the financing side, we've bootstrapped to a point where instead of spending a few $1 billion on this research, we would be able to complete the whole thing end to end commercialization, including clinical trials, patents, and so on, in under $10 million, spread over 4 years. Uh, Now, we were also able to compress the time for clinical trials using some of the cutting edge technologies that have been developed by companies like Microsoft and Amazon. So that's also contributing to compressing the time frame quite dramatically. And again, that involves artificial intelligence. In fact, in every part of my business is artificial. Even my accounting software has AI. So coming back is that bootstrapping, working with a whole ecosystem of partners who can help you achieve efficiencies, and the fact that you're a startup, you're a lot more nimble. That's where I think you have the big advantage.
But in terms of who would be some of the potential competitors, now you said that this is nobody else is looking at this type of solution or this approach to solving this problem, and so there's
Yeah.
probably other people that are trying to solve this
Yes,
potentially differently.
sure.
How do they compare with what you're trying to do?
So let me give you an example. Recently, say there was a company that I came across in Singapore that has been creating a device for analysis of breath for arriving at diagnosis of COVID. Okay, so theoretically it sounds similar, but what they're doing is working on specific sensors that is only for that particular disease, and it doesn't provide a lot of detailed information. Hence, you'll see that many patients will be doing the PCR test and so on. So it's not as accurate, or the sensitivity or the specificity, which is to do with false positives and so on. That's not as good. What we're doing is going much deeper, right at the molecular level, so we can then also analyze other diseases. So theoretically it's analysis of breath, but it's what do we do uh, with that breath? That's what is the real differentiator. So that's and then we can get to a higher level of specificity and sensitivity through not just AI but also a combination of other techniques like photonics and so on. So yeah, that's how we feel we are going to be different.
Yeah. And what would be the types of companies that you'll be coming against as you sort of go to market with this?
Sure. So as of now, we think that just for the technology that we are developing, we would be first in the world. But there are of course large established players in this field who, say for example, in the field of diagnostic imaging, you've got large players like GE or Siemens or Philips and so on. Similarly, in the field of pathological investigations, you've got companies like Beckman Coulter and so on that produce these large capital equipment for the analysis. So certainly they are some of the uh, you can say potential competitors, or they are the people who could be impacted by what our product is likely to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you see your capability being an to be a supplement for a early diagnostic, and to be a supplement or a substitute? I mean, how are you thinking about your platform?
Um, it could be a combination of both. It could be supplementing as well as substituting. So in this particular case, we're certainly aiming for substitution. But in the future, for other forms of diagnosis, we could be supplementing current diagnosis as well, just to augment the decision making with speed and accuracy. So we are looking at both the approaches there. And then, it could also be that we could partner with, pharma companies or medical device companies for whom what we are doing is complementary to their therapy strategy. So I don't see these large players necessarily as competition. It could even be a means of co-optation and collaboration, where we could work together on achieving a common goal, where we are simply the sum of parts is more than the individual.
So, I know we talked a lot about some of the relationships you've forged internationally in terms of
Yep.
healthcare institutions that are quite keen on
Yes.
taking up something like this. Tell us more a bit
Yeah.
about that.
So as part of the process, we were looking at you know uh, clinical trials in countries, and so I'm aligning with companies like Covance in North America, Clarivate in Europe, say IQVIA in Asia, and so on. These are companies which are large CRO organizations. They help you with end-to-end solutions for clinical trials, economics, reimbursement, and the whole lot. Regulatory submissions. So, with their help and with the help of some of the clinicians that I'm aware of, we are trying to get into an alliance with some of the largest tertiary institutions to do large scale trials and also then get credibility. So, clinical trials are needed not just marketing purposes but also for regulatory purposes. Similarly, health economics to prove the value of the product, which is also needed for reimbursements in, say, the US or Australia and so on. So, in that process, I've already identified more than 18 hospitals. In fact, my target is to get to 50 large hospitals across the 9 countries I'm targeting, predominantly in Western Europe, North America, and Asia, and get to more because then this will give us the scale in the trial and the credibility when we can publish, you know, highly accurate data and reputed peer-reviewed journals, which could be extremely valuable to the regulators and to potential customers or even potential buyers for my company because strategic exit is an aim for most of my projects. The idea is that I then get on to the next exciting idea. So yeah, and the ultimate target is to get to more than 100 large institutions before we get actually get finish the product development and get to the clinic. So it's a journey, building more relationships.
So you talked about the journey, and healthcare is a slow journey. It's a slow burn.
Yep.
I guess the question I have there is, what are you thinking in terms of timelines? Because you've got one is you got to prove that it works,
Yes.
and then you've got to get through the regulatory approvals,
Yes.
and then you also then have to worry about the reimbursement aspects of
Yep.
that.
Yep.
I mean, even though they're two very different decision
Yes.
points, and you can get it to market, get it reimbursed later,
Sure.
and all of that is a long journey. Assuming
Yes.
all of that works in every single sequence,
Yes.
what sort of timeframes are we looking at?
In my projects, the time frame for commercialization is between 3 and 5 years for the full end-to-end commercialization. So that right from product development to all the way to the finish point where we are ready for a strategic exit. So the information I've had from the companies I'm working on the CRO space is that the clinical trials will be, and some of these are happening in parallel, so not sequentially. And the health economic studies will also go hand in hand. So we're trying to save time, not to mention the technologies from the larger companies like Amazon and so on. So we should be able to wrap that up in about 2 to 2.5 years time, and then get into the regulatory submissions. Uh, most jurisdictions are coming out with new guidelines on regulation for digital health. This falls into that category. So software is a medical device, and because the products are lower in risk, so like in Australia, you have a classification of class one, two, and so on. The time taken for the regulatory approval will also be relatively less. And we are also working with specific consultants in this space who help us to speed up things and also make those applications. So I am at this stage reasonably confident that depending on the project, by 4 to 5 years, we should be at a point of strategic exit. In fact, we are also working with consultants already to look at strategic exit right from now because that process itself could take 2 or 3 years. So, through my experience, I've been lucky to be in touch with an ecosystem of a lot of partners, some really good people, and they are the ones who are now helping me in the business as well. So, that's the whole ecosystem I'm working with to make sure that we can get to the end-to-end commercialization in the fastest possible time.
Yeah. So I mean, I know you mentioned that one of the project is going to cost somewhere between another $10 million of injection, other
Yes.
than what you've already invested in so far.
Yes.
How's your capital raise journey going? Tell us more about that.
So what's happening right now is we're getting grants from the governments to fund the research and so on. The next step is to start, pitching to investors, whether they are high net worth individuals or venture capitalists, and the right investors who, by that I mean people who have both an understanding and a patience for healthcare, because it takes a little longer for return on investment compared to other, say, software areas. So that's the phase, and then we've got project-driven milestones so that we can have a staggered investment, and then at the end of 4 or 5 years, there could be a good strategic exit where we're expecting a good return because these are platforms as well. So that's the approach. Is trying to now the next step is to reach out to venture capitalists anywhere, not just in Australia, to seek the funding. And to that extent, I'm working actively to seek warm introductions to the right people so that I can pitch to those people. And I think the training at your institution has been very helpful there.
So how's that journey? How's that journey so far? And yeah, how's that journey so far? And tell it, just give us a sense of where you're at with your journey in terms of a capital raise, and what are some of the things you can be thinking of that can help accelerate that process.
So, as I said, I've been a part of some incubator programs, including the one at AI Australia, and I'm actively implementing the learning from those things because I'm doing this for the first time. So things like having a cap table ready, getting advice from financial experts on the valuation side of things. I've got very detailed costing. So all the components needed for due diligence by a venture capitalist, I'm trying my best to be as prepared as we can. We would have things like information memorandums ready, um, a lot of data on technical due diligence required, and even the research partners are happy to talk to the advanced people. So being ready, that's on the information preparedness. In terms of reaching out to potential investors, we're getting on to professional organizations like Thai Global, Crunchbase is a platform where we're seeking professional subscriptions, seeking the help of the incubator programs itself to reach out to potential investors so that we are on their radar, and then knowing who's in the investment space because some funds are not investing at this stage, and speaking to a lot of investors to understand their psychology and their pain points to to make a better presentation to them so that we can address some of those issues because they have lots of ideas coming to them. So there's I realize that there's competition out there. I'm not the only one with a good idea. So that's the approach we're taking, and that's an ongoing journey. So there's not a single day where I'm on the internet networking with people in Australia or overseas in this investment space.
Yeah. And what sort of feedback are you getting? I know it's still very early days. What
Yeah.
sort of feedback are you getting from capital providers?
Um, the initial feedback has been positive. They love the idea. Many of them have said they'd like to speak to me again. Some of them also started off with a bit of a technical due diligence, so some of them just didn't believe the concept, so they wanted to see published papers and get more information about it. So then that sort of convinced them. Now they're getting into the financial side of evaluating and seeing if they are happy. But to be honest with you, it's not been as quick as I would have liked. It's been a tough gig and a hard slog, and yeah. So I'm learning along the way as well. But I get the feeling that Australia and the US could be the places where, or even Singapore could be the places where I have to fish around for more investors.
Just speaking of which, you said it is hard work, as an entrepreneur and as a founder of company, co-founder of a company in a startup. I'm looking at your background. You spent 25 years in very large multinational global companies, well prestige, well respected jobs. What's been the transition like for you?
Um, there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of humility and realization of things that you need to unlearn. So that's where these incubator programs have been great. I think the big challenge has been work life balance because you're working 7 days a week. You're initially like a one man army. You're reaching out to lots of people. It's a steep learning curve. You're understanding various components of, whether it's intellectual property or law or regulatory affairs or branding or, um, I knew a bit of branding from my marketing background, but it's just so much more from a global scale. And while it's motivating to learn that, it also takes it. You're working very long hours, so 15 to 20 hour days is not uncommon for me, which is sometimes taking a bit of a toll on the home front. Yeah. Uh, but at the same time, I think when you're passionate about something, time flies by. It's I sleep and I get tired, but I just love what I'm doing, and that kind of thing. So it's I've worked long hours in corporate jobs as well, but this is different. I don't. Um, it doesn't hurt you, but at the same time, it's long hours and there is no shortcut. There's absolutely no shortcut. So it's a transition. It's also there are some advantages. You work from home. There's flexibility. You learn a lot. You network a lot. You get to know so much from so many people. So it's an exciting journey. But there are some ups and downs as well. You do meet some people who are not that pleasant or not very supportive, that kind of thing. But the hardest part for me was even on the home front to convince my wife that we're going to be in a situation where there may not be some income for a while, and coming from a job where you have a fixed income coming in, that was tough. So because you could be a point where you run out of your savings, and then what? And I have a son who goes to a private school. We didn't want to take him out. So yeah, that so doing some side gigs and so on, that helps. But that was the thing. But the real one is, I think I think you grow a lot as a person as well. You learn so much from different facets. I studied my MBA 20 years ago, but now I think I'm implementing it.
Right. Speaking of which, tell us more about yourself. Let's understand Hitesh.
Yep. So I grew up in India. I had the benefit of living in many different parts of India. My father was a doctor in the army, so he used to get transferred every 2 years. And what's really great about India is that it's like 28 states, and could be more states now. I've lost track, but it's like 28 different countries living together. People, they have different dialects, slightly different languages, um, more than 14 or 16 religions, and they live together. The harmony in that diversity is just mind blowing. And when you live in different places, you really get to appreciate that place and the culture a lot more than you going there as a tourist kind of thing. So I really loved and appreciated India, and I wanted to get in medical research. So I trained in pharmacology, which is more drugs and so on. I was a sophisticated butcher, for a better word, killing lots of animals for the research. Now things have changed. People do a lot more on stem cells and so on. So then I realized that there wasn't much funding available in the institution where I was doing, and you need some funding for research, equipment and so on. I'm not saying money alone contributes to the intelligence, but funding where I was studying was woefully low. So I then joined the corporate world. Abbott at that stage used to be Canol, so, a German company, which in turn was the offshoot from the British Boots. So then Canol got acquired by Abbott, the American company, and that was my first step, exposure to the corporate world, the marketing and sales, and meeting customers and actually being on the other side of the table, looking at doctors. And I had fun along the way because I was a bit of a scientist all the time. I used to ask lots of questions. I used to trust my people a lot. So there were fewer hierarchies. My reps used to find that I was a different product manager. I used to try to help them and so on. Everybody was doing. I'm not saying I was the only chap helping them, but that ability to relate to people, to listen to them, and to trust that they are also intelligent individuals. I never believed in the Ford mentality of somebody's the brain and somebody's the feet. That really helped. And so all through the career, I consciously blurred the lines between sales and marketing to bring them together so that we could get the feedback. Uh, that worked a lot. That whole idea of profits through people helped me a lot in managing teams in India and the UK and Australia. I was in Abbott in the UK and then came here. My wife wanted to do intensive care medicine at the time, so we quit the job, came here, got into a company called Baxter's Allegiance division, then moved to 3M. So it has been an exciting journey. 3M was amazing, gave me opportunities to be in different parts of the business, including healthcare and industrial and so on. So you get exposed to other parts, and everything is a bit of a learning. Each business is very different. I also had exposure to corporate strategy. So then there was a point where I was thinking I always wanted to involve the cutting edge technologies for the betterment of healthcare. Because of my medical background and having spent a lot of time, healthcare was a passion. So what should I do? I didn't want to go into the traditional pharmaceutical route, nor did I have the funding to do that. And then I started networking with clinicians, and we formed a group called Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, which is a very big one. And we meet, and that's how I started catching up with research institutions and doctors who are doing cutting edge stuff, and that just blew me away. I was really convinced that these research projects in AI, particularly, offer the hope to go to the next level of frontier in treating medicine, where you don't have an answer with a medicine or a pharmaceutical or a medical device. So that excited me. Not only solving a medical problem and helping humanity, but the fact that you could run a business in. Yes, there's competition, so that's also exciting. I love that. All through my career, I like that as well. So,
How did you end up in AI? Like, I mean, I know you kind of talked about corporate.
yes,
That's not a normal event.
yes.
Tell us a bit more about that.
So as I was attending these global events in artificial intelligence in medicine, in these conferences, you have mainly doctors or allied health professionals who are presenting their research, and they're talking about what's happening conventionally versus what are they doing differently with artificial intelligence, and why do they see a potential happening. In many cases, they would present advances in what they've done. Some people had progressed beyond some stages of clinical trials, or you could even have some government organizations like eHealth New South Wales, for example, doing a fantastic job in promoting digital health. So I started learning a lot about these different facets of technology, and because of my own medical training, I could understand what they were doing, and that's what really attracted me to this. And then I started reaching out to these research institutions and actually understanding what work they were doing. So lots of Zoom calls. The good thing about COVID is I found that people were more willing to accept calls on Zoom and MS Teams and things like that. So for me, the world is 60 centimeters away. It's on my laptop, and I'm literally seeing every country as a postcode now. And I'm increasingly realizing that there's less hesitation for people. This morning, I was in call with a guy in the US who could potentially be an advisor. I mean, he runs a data analytics company in the field of AI, and they're doing some amazing stuff with the Department of Defense and healthcare and so on. It could be huge. So through that process, I started learning, and and also then because of my commercial background, started thinking, how do you make money? Because it's not just about publish or perish. It was about, in this case, before I went to an investor, I wanted to be sure that I've done enough due diligence with all my experience to go to them to be able to speak with the conviction to say it's worth putting the money. It's like my own money. A return is one thing, but the first thing is to protect the capital. So that was the approach. And then, um, as I met some amazing people in various specialties, neurosurgeons and cardiologists and intensivists and so on, I just realized that these guys are at the cutting edge. The work is really good. The customer validation further substantiated that. So that's how I got into AI. And I'm not fussed about AI. It could be the next round of technology, could be anything, could be a different form of machine learning, could be photonics, could be genomics. It's the cutting edge that's solving a problem in a very simple manner that's also affordable. And as long as the procedure volumes are big, you also make money along the way, and that's attractive to the investors. So that's the whole approach.
So, I mean, if I can summarize that, if I understand you correct, you have comfortable, safe, and secure corporate world
Yep.
of healthcare, um, and then you come across AI and technology, and you learn a little bit on that. At what point do you decide to take the leap from corporate roles and end up full time dedicated into your startup?
What I realized quickly is that it was going to be hard to do two roles because there's so much involvement in the startup side. You need to learn a lot, and then you're implementing your learning. And you're setting up your own business, and it was impossible to do two jobs. And you lose focus, and you don't do good at any other area. So it definitely was a conscious decision to say at some point in time you draw the line and move on to this side, because otherwise you could be doing yourself a disservice, your project a disservice. You're not adding the amount of momentum that you need, or talking to the lots of people in your ecosystem partners to help you gain the traction in your commercialization. So it was a clear decision that there was a point where I realized that you were compromising both. So just took the leap and then had some discussions in the family, some of which were pleasant, some were not so pleasant, and then just took a call. So it was a huge risk, but I'm confident that, reasonably confident that it'll lead to something good.
So 2 years in,
Yep.
what's it like? What's it like today? Like relative to where you thought you were going to be 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And what's next?
As I'm seeing more information coming out of the research and the data, it's giving me more confidence that we are in the right direction. And that's just telling me, wow, we could be hitting onto something big. I can't wait for the clinical trials and other things to start to actually prove what a big difference these products can make. So along the way, at the start, there was some doubt, will this work, will it not work, because doctors tend to have different protocols in different hospitals for the same thing. So as we started doing more customer validation, we started getting more conviction. As I'm seeing more information being published and so on, I'm getting more faith in the science behind the product, and the fact that we are really offering a good solution versus the competition. The next step is to take it all the way to the commercialization. So I'm a lot more confident before I was 2 years ago. Not to mention the learning I've had from the incubator programs like AI Australia, which has also given me a lot more learning and understanding about the things that I wouldn't have thought of, particularly from a technology perspective, or responsible AI and things like that, or go-to-market models and so on. So that itself, I would say, was also very, very helpful in plugging the gaps in my knowledge, or getting the partnerships wherever I couldn't have all the expertise.
Yeah.
To get that forward. So I feel a lot more confident today than I was 2 years ago.
Awesome. I mean, so speaking of kind of the next steps,
Yes.
For you, I mean, this is still going to be a long journey.
Yes.
What do you think is going to take for you to be better prepared for the long haul?
As soon as I get the investments, my critical element is to start imbibing components of lean as much as is practically possible in the healthcare side, because unlike a software where you can do lots of iterations and come out with a finished product, here you're dealing with human beings, so you can't experiment beyond a point. So use that as a means to consistently fine tune the product and get it to a point where we do accept. Hopefully, we do very well in the clinical trials, or use the learning from the clinical trials to improve the product, and then take it to the commercialization. Long haul is I see myself as a company that has a pipeline of the most exciting ideas. So I'm working with about 15 leading clinicians worldwide, and I want to expand that network again. These are people who are great in their domain, but also have a lot of expertise in technology, including artificial intelligence. So they would be my first filter to say, is this idea worth it? Or is there an untapped need? Is it really different compared to the conventional approaches? And then we start looking at numbers and so on. So that's the approach we take to the long haul, because in most of my projects, I want to have strategic exit as an approach as opposed to the IPO route. At least that's the way I'm thinking right now. And to that extent, a differentiated idea. So the long haul is very exciting. It's all about the next best thing, using AI possibly in healthcare. And then, then setting up a larger company that helps me in the process, having, instead of relying on consulting partners, perhaps having, them full time working for me, so that I can spend all my time on the next best idea.
Awesome. We're just coming up to the top of the hour.
Yeah.
Our executive producers, Nick and Allison, are there any questions that are coming in from the audiences?
Yes, actually, and this is one that a lot of our guests have had to answer, but it's always something that people want to know. And I think, especially in a med tech field, which is quite different than a lot of the things we've talked about before, what did you or Enteliqo find to be the biggest hurdle when first kind of realizing Enteliqo's vision? And how have you been able to overcome it, or currently overcoming it right now?
So the biggest hurdle, this is as an entrepreneur, was to unlearn some of the things you take for granted, right? So it's your biases. You get trained in corporations in a certain way, and it's about coming to, it's like grounding, coming to the humility that there is another way, and perhaps what you thought and you learned may or may not work in the new setup. So it's those internal biases and mindset barriers that you overcome. The next barrier, I would say, is the knowledge barrier. So there are many aspects when you become an entrepreneur that you need to understand, that you don't always get exposed to. And I didn't get exposed to in a large corporation. I won't generalize about everybody. So they're the two things: your mindset, biases, and being humble enough to unlearn some of the, to get, otherwise, I can say I've got 25 years of experience, and therefore, but there could be some things in my 25 years of experience that could be counterproductive to what I'm trying to achieve. So, and the second aspect is trying to very quickly, by knowledge barriers, I mean, working with companies like AI Incubator and so on, where you learn from somebody else's mistakes, so you don't necessarily have to. They have very good structured programs to train you on becoming a good entrepreneur. Things that, the learning that has come from literally hundreds of years and thousands of entrepreneurs. So you get that. So that gives you efficiency. So they're the two big hurdles, I would say. Um,
And also, just one more before we finish up the podcast and close out. Obviously, now living in a post COVID world, I mean, last year a spotlight has been put on the entire medical field, but medtech as well. And with that in mind, what do you kind of see the future of medtech in the next 10 years, 20 years? However, how do you see the trends and the things moving there?
so I I'll answer that question in two parts. The first one is, I see the future as very, very exciting. Uh, I'll tell you why. I see four major challenges facing healthcare in general. Right. The first one is around the financial uh, operation, and the sustainability from a finance perspective. So the healthcare organizations have this challenge of providing high quality care, but they need to achieve financial sustainability by doing that at an affordable cost. The second area is what I would call the care model innovation, which is, rather than treating a patient through acute episodic methods, you treat the patient as a whole, more holistic approach, and then get more efficiencies in treatment like that. The third area I would say is, the third challenge I would say is digital transformation and interoperability. As technologies are advancing in interoperability, clinicians are able to provide much better quality of care in a way in which the patients and the consumers are willing to, or they want to receive it. And the last one is the future of work with aging population and the shortage of highly skilled clinicians, particularly in many parts of the world. Uh, what is happening is that there's going to be a big need to source, to hire, to train, and to retain highly skilled clinical staff. And in all these four areas, AI makes a dramatic impact. It helps, artificial intelligence helps to improve the speed and accuracy in the diagnosis, improves earlier intervention and earlier treatment. It improves the quality of the patient care. It reduces the cost of treatment per patient. It improves the overall population health. That's why it is the fastest growing area within healthcare. The reports that I'd seen were in excess of 40 to 60% growth rate. The values of that uh, they call it healthcare AI. The sales figures I've seen in some reports are in excess of $150 billion already. There are many, many startups in this space. So the potential is just massive. But if you think about it, why is it massive? Because it's addressing the fundamental problems in healthcare, which are not being resolved by some of the alternatives. So I think the future is just massive. And I think this is the future, artificial intelligence and all these areas. This is going to make the life for both the doctors and the patients and the payers very exciting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Hitesh. This has been
Thanks.
truly enlightening, and I'm sure our viewers will agree. But just before we sign off today on the Sydney Startup Show, I was wondering if Callum would like to let our viewers know what we've got coming up on Friday and who we're going to be featuring with our Friday SJ podcast. Yeah, if we want.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So who have we got? Who have we got coming on Friday? SJ.
Yeah. Oh, I'm super excited about this Friday. We've got SJ coming on board. SJ is also based out of the Sydney Startup Hub, and SJ's got such a strong story, not just the Indigenous story as well, but also some of his amazing stories he brings from being injured while being a journalist in Afghanistan. Whilst he was with Al Jazeera news production. So, wow, I mean, I think that's an example of such a different angle that he's coming from, and his entrepreneurship journey as where it is today. I mean, is absolutely phenomenal. I can't wait for having him on the show on Friday.
Fantastic. We'll be watching. We're all excited. And thank you, Hitesh.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much.
Callum, for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you,
Thanks, Callum.
Hitesh.
This has been fantastic. Sydney Startup